Every year I fall in love with old world Christmas decor until I see the price tags. You know, the cozy cottages, the weathered stone. They're so beautiful, but not budget friendly. Hi, my name is Leslie, and welcome back to Happy Tuesday, where we do crafts and DIY and more on a budget. Today I'm going to show you how I recreated that old world timeless charm with a few simple supplies and a little bit of creativity. Now don't forget to stick around until the very end and I'll have a hint on one of next week's projects. So let's get building. Here's a quick sneak peek into what we are making today, this little old world scene. And we're going to start with the foundation because you've got to have a good foundation for your house to sit on. So I grabbed one of those small cutting boards out of the Dollar Tree kitchen supply. It's good and sturdy, and a buck 25, buck 50, buck 75, whatever it is your store is charging for it now. You could also use MDF, or if you had some really thick cardboard, I suppose you could use that too. And we painted it, well, I painted mine elephant gray. It is a Waverly color that you can buy at Walmart. And then I'm using some of this powdered spackle. I've used this in a few projects this year, and so I've got a big old bag of it, and we're just going to keep adding it to things and seeing what we come up with. And we're going to mix that up to, I would say, a thick pancake consistency, kind of like a milkshake maybe. And using our little popsicle stick or craft stick that we use to mix it with, I am going to lay that into a good layer. You don't want it too thin because we are going to be making cobblestones, but you don't want it too thick because that's going to take a lot more time. And it doesn't need to be for the look that we're going for. So once you've gotten it all put on there, then you're just going to take your craft stick, and once it has started to harden, now the one that I have is 20-minute work time. And actually I worked on this total, I want to say about 30 minutes, and it still wasn't completely hard when I finished. So it gives you a good amount of time to work with it. But we're going to use our craft stick and kind of carve out our little paved stones or cobblestones, and that's why we painted the base gray, because you're going to be able to see that gray behind each of the cobblestones as you carve it out. And then I'm just using that cup that I mixed in to take off the extra off of my craft stick so that I can continue carving out those stones. Now, once I get to the end, then I'm just going to make sure that, I've got the separation in between each stone, and then I'm going to set it aside to dry. Now, I let this dry overnight. It does get hard in about an hour or two, but I wanted to sand it down because it had some rough edges, and so you want to make sure that you're not just like ripping up what you just put down. Now, the sandpaper, I'm using 100 grit or 120 grit. It did take a little bit of the cobblestone, I mean, of that spackling off, but not bad. Nothing that wouldn't look, I guess, aged. So next we're going to come in with a paintbrush and our sponge brush, and we are going to paint all of our cobblestones in that same Waverly elephant color that we painted the board underneath. And this actually took some time. I think painting it took more time than carving out all the stones. And then as you can see here, I'm taking the paintbrush and I'm kind of tipping it up from different angles to make sure that I got all the pieces in between. Not that the white couldn't be useful. You could, add some snow to your scene, and then, it wouldn't matter. But and then we're going to dry that with our heat tool. You want this to be good and dry before you start dry brushing on all our colors. Now, to weather this, I am using sandstone, silver lining, truffle, and black. And I am just going in there and building layers on. So I started with the silver lining. That's a very light gray color. Went in with the sandstone next.
Then I came in with the truffle. You can see the truffle is starting to add some highlights and lowlights onto the spaces in between, as well as, kind of sticking on to those raised edges. And then last, we're going to come in with our ink color. And I put quite a bit of ink on there because since these are aged stones, we want them to, look like the streets have been driven over with that horse and buggy, and it just it looks amazing, I think. And that's all there is to this project, really. It's super simple, super easy. You really can't hardly mess this up. There's just so much freedom in getting all the cobblestones cut out.
Now that we've got our foundation done, I know you're excited to see what's coming up next. But before we do that, I'd love for you to hit that subscribe button and click the bell below. Then you'll be notified every time I upload a new video, and you'll help my channel grow. Give today's video a big old thumbs up, share it with your friends, comment down below, give it a hype, and let's get back to building that old world charming street.
Now, Christmas and Christmas decor isn't quite finished until we have some light features to it. So we are going to build a lantern. And I'm going to apologize right now. A few of the steps did not get videoed. I don't know whether I was just distracted, not sure. But anyway, we're going to start out with these tiny little circles. You can buy these at at Hobby Lobby. You can also buy them at Michael's. And this little bag comes with 3 different sizes. So we're going to use 3 of the tiny ones and then 1 of the middle-sized one. And that's going to build part of our lantern that goes at the top. And then we are going to add on another little tiny one on top. And so as you see, we've got and I'm going to go kind of slow and show you more of this painting than I normally do. But you've got those at the bottom, the 3 tiny ones, the middle one, and then another little one on top of the middle one. And then that gives you a place for your little toothpicks to sit into in order to build the lantern part. Then the top is a middle-sized one, a half bead, another small one, 2 tiny beads in gradient sizes, and then in the top of the tiniest bead on top, I've got a little bit of toothpick poking out. And the toothpicks are the pieces around the lantern where the light will go. All right, then I guess I missed showing you the base too. So the base is 3 or 4 of those bigger ones with a dowel on the top. And then holding it all into place, I've got some air dry clay, which I used to form the base of our lantern, and the dowel is poking out. Now I'm taking some of this plastic, and this was actually plastic that bottle brush bottle trees, there we go, brush bottle trees were inside of. So you can see it's kind of that crinkly plastic, not the softer plastic. And I am going to go ahead and glue that almost all the way around. And you can see you've got a little white spot in there. And that is where that piece of the toothpick is not all the way glued down in the back side because I left it open, and I'm going to leave this plastic open in the back so that we can take our little light in and out, so it doesn't have to stay there. Now, if you want to do this with lights that are going to actually stay in there, you could drill a hole in the bottom, run a fairy light up there, maybe run the lights down the post, and then be able to have your on-off switch hiding underneath the lamp post. That could be an idea. But honestly, I didn't think about it when I was building it until later. So then we've glued our top to our bottom, and we're going to come in with this Spanish copper rub and buff and just a little bit on your finger, and we're going to give this lantern some character. Now we painted it ink, but it needs to look old world to go with the rest, and this copper just does the job. And as you can see, that plastic piece in there just makes it look like it is truly a lantern. I am loving how this is turning out. All right, then we are going to grab our handy dandy drill and a small drill bit and another toothpick, and I'm going to mark the hole where the hole starts, because we are drilling into something super thin and small, and so we don't want our drill to accidentally pop off. So I'm going to kind of pre-drill a hole with the awl and then push it all the way through with my handy dandy pink drill, and that will give us space to put that toothpick through. Now I've clipped off one end, and I'm going to take a small bead and put it on there. And then if I wanted to, I could hang a little Christmas banner from this. Originally, I thought I was going to hang my wreath from it, but I ended up just gluing the wreath to the front. But it does add to the character of our lantern. So here's our tiny little bead. We're just going to put at the end. We're going to paint that black as well. Then I'm going to use a piece of this pipe cleaner, and I'm going to glue it together, and then using a forest green acrylic paint, I am going to paint it green. Now, probably would have taken less paint if I'd have picked a green one to start with, a green uh, pipe cleaner, but I've been using this pipe cleaner for several different projects. And then I just used some greenery I had already and kind of put it around the wreath to make it look like it actually was a wreath, and added on a little shoestring bow. And here it is, all complete. I am loving this lantern, and I might create some more for some of my Christmas scenes that I have. Only I think I'm going to go with the fairy light idea and drill the hole up in the bottom. That brings us to setting our scene. We're going to have a little Christmas market sign. That way, if you want to build more houses, you could even add that house we built a couple of weeks ago, and I'll have that video linked below. So that you can build your whole own little village out of craft sticks and chipboard. Super budget friendly, and honestly you get the look from the paint that you add and not necessarily the supplies that you're using. So don't think that you can't have a Christmas village on a budget. All right, so for this, we're going to take 8 craft sticks and cut them about the same size for however tall you want your Christmas market sign to be, and then glue 4 of them together and then the other 4 together, and those are going to be the outside part of our sign. And then while it dries, I'm just using that Dollar Tree wood glue by Super Glue. I love this stuff. And while that dries, I'm going to clip that with some of those little Dollar Tree craft clips to hold it into place and make sure that we don't get any warping. And then I'm going to take some of this quick wood wood putty, and I'm going to fill in the holes on these beads. These beads are going to sit on the top, so you don't have to necessarily fill the hole all the way in all the way through, because the only part that you're going to see is the top part. And grabbing a larger craft stick, I cut it to size, and this is going to be what we use for our signage. So you want each piece to be as big as you want your sign to be wide. And then I'm just using ivory acrylic paint to paint both sides of this, because in a village you would see both sides of that sign. And then we're going to use some of that wood glue again to glue these 2 pieces together, and I just glued them on top of my silicone mat here, and set them aside while they dried. All right, while all that is drying, we're going to take our little scrap piece of paper and some painter's tape, and I'm going to add our pieces on there that need to be um, painted. We're actually going to paint them with some antique wax. And rather than the traditional method that I use with the baby wipes, I'm going to use a paintbrush, because I want this to be a darker color. So, you could go in with a stain instead of the antique wax, but I just wanted it to be a darker, more richer, fuller color to go with our old world style. All All right, now that we've got everything coated in that antique wax and our sign painted, we're going to start assembly. And so I have a base piece as well, and that's going to kind of help with the stability of our sign. And then we're going to add in some bottoms. So first we'll take those beads and we'll put those on top of kind of the end caps, if you will, of our sign. Then we're going to glue our sign piece in between and then add that bottom. And again, I'm sorry, I missed the part where I hand wrote on there Christmas market and just added a little bit of green paint for some decor. But it didn't want to stand up perfectly straight. And plus, we're going to put this on cobblestone. So I added a couple of little tiny squares to the bottom to make a little base. And then I also went in with a little bit of that same greenery I made the wreath out of so that everything coordinates, and rusticed it up with a little bit of my brown stamp pad. And that brings us to a place to pause. Here is a little bench that is going to go in our scene. So we're going to use some more craft sticks, and I'm going to cut the ends off and then kind of figure out how big I want my bench. Now, the problem in, sometimes making miniature scenes is getting it all to be the same scale. But I wasn't really worried about that as much with this bench, just because it's hard to build a tiny scale to match the size of our house with a bench with craft sticks. So we're just going to build it and make it as small as we can, and we're going to go with it. Maybe it's one of those oversized benches that you see in, fun little areas. I don't know. I'm just making up stories now. Anyway, we're going to cut um, two posts that go on the back side, and we're going to cut 4 pieces for each of those and glue those together. And then we're going to cut shorter pieces that are going to be the bench piece. And then we have one size, the same size as the bench, that's going to go across the back as the back piece. And it's just a 1. Everything else is a 4. So we're going to go ahead and glue those together and clamp those off in 4s. And then we're going to start assembly, or seeing how this is going to assemble. Now, those 2 bench pieces, they need to have a little bit of space in between. So we're going to add a couple of craft sticks underneath as stability, leaving room because you're going to have feet in the front that are going to go down. Speaking of feet, let's go ahead and get those measured. Now, I made my mark at the top of that bench. It actually should have been underneath the bench. So I had to go back in and trim it again. So for if you're making this, make that second cut to go underneath the bench. And now we're going to go ahead and get these all painted with some antique wax and then start assembly. So those first 2 feet are going to go on the front of our bench, and the long piece is going to go on the back side of the bench. We're going to use that extra support piece along the back of the bench. And then I'm going to come in with a couple of little decorative screws that I cut the screw heads off of and just glue those in to look like that bench back was actually screwed into the legs that are supporting it. And you need to give this glue time to dry. You can always do the wood glue and then a little dab of hot glue if you need that immediate oopsies if you need that immediate hold, or you can clamp it together to hold it. But here it is. I love it. And I also, just for giggles, glued a couple of pieces of stick together to look like a bundle of wood sitting next to our bench. And now we are at the showstopper, bringing it all to life. Here is our little house. And I bought these little houses. They came in packs of 3 at Hobby Lobby on clearance. If you can't find these, you can make a putz house like we did a few weeks ago. I will have that linked below with chipboard. You could use tiny little bird houses. Maybe you can find something similar to this, or you could make it with, a chunk of wood and create yourself a little roof line. These are hollow, and so I'm going to cut them out so that I can have light inside my house. And at first I tried to freehand it, and then I thought, why freehand it when I've got the perfect little stick here? uh, I think this is a painter stir stick that would be perfect. And then these little wooden pieces that I can make windows and the door out of. So I'm going to go ahead and draw those on. And then I am going to take my drill and I'm going to drill some holes in it to make it easier to cut out with my utility knife. I tried thinking if there was an easier way than this utility knife to cut out these pieces. I didn't come up with one. So if you can come up with a quicker, easier way to cut these out, let me know in the comments below. But I'm going to go ahead and use my drill that kind of opens up the spaces. And I did go back in later and just add more drill marks so that I was, using that utility knife in between less pieces of wood. But I didn't want to ruin these pieces because I want to be able to use them for something else. For example, we are going to be using this door and we're going to be putting it back in as a door. All right, now I've got some more of that dried powdered spackle, and I'm making it just a little bit thinner this time, more like a pancake consistency. And we are going to be dabbing that all over our house to give it kind of that stucco-ish look, I guess. And then we'll be painting over top of that. So I'm going to do that everywhere except the roof. Now, earlier on, I was showing you some different sticks, and I was just showing you different things that you could use to make the roof out of. For example, paint stir sticks, craft sticks. You could actually buy that, little wooden pieces that you can buy in the doll section or dollhouse section at a craft store. Or you could use coffee stir sticks, or just, little balsa squares, which is what I ended up using. And then I'm going to cut them down. And now I'm coming in after I've let this dry overnight with some ivory acrylic paint. And then we are going to dry brush some of this antique wax, uh, as little or as much as you want, but this gives it that old world feel on top of the painted stucco. So I'm going to go ahead and give that a nice coat. It hits all those raised edges, and I think it just makes this whole thing come to life. It just then pops, I think. So we're going to go ahead and give that a nice coat. And I did hit the corners and stuff a little bit heavier just to, give it a little bit more pop. I also hit that roof just in case any of our roof tiles, didn't cover the roof. All right, now I've got this one piece left over from the window, and we're going to cut it into about a third, and I'm going to use that as a little stoop in front of my door. Now I'm going to grab some paint or some tape and all of my little wooden pieces, some paint stir sticks. We're going to use those for trim. I'm sorry, those aren't paint stir sticks. Those are coffee stir sticks that I bought at Walmart. We're going to use those as pieces of trim. And then, of course, as you saw in the beginning, I cut some of those little wooden squares that I bought on clearance at Hobby Lobby. And then I showed you, they still have some, they're rectangle and not wood. I mean, not squares. But I'm going to go ahead and get those cut and got those cut. And then we painted them all with the antique wax. And now with a little bit of wood glue, we are going to glue these all onto our roof line. I did leave a little bit of overhang on the side, and then we will stagger them as we build our layers. When I very first started building this house, I guess I must have been half asleep because I started the roof line at the ridge, and then started going down, and it wasn't looking right. And it's because you have to build the roof from the bottom up, not the top down. So learn from my mistake. And don't worry if these are not all the same size or not all the same length, because, this is old world and it's supposed to look vintagey and not perfect, and weathered. And so, I did try to line up the bottom part, but not necessarily the top part. and then, staggered the rows so that it looked like a roof line. And then I came in with a couple of those little coffee stir sticks and added on a ridge cap onto the top to cover up, where the seam is. Now we're going to create a little piece that's going to go inside where that door is so that we can glue our door back in there. And you may be saying to yourself, well, why did we cut it out? Well, we cut it out and we cut the windows out because we want to put light inside here. And if you don't, then you can't see the light. And, light at Christmas is important. Now, I spent way too much time on this door than I should have, and I honestly saved you from all the shenanigans, most of the shenanigans, but I did use an awl and tried to cut out, the little indentations. In hindsight, I did just draw that in there and not try to cut it out. And then I didn't like this green, and so I sanded it off and painted it again and sanded it off and painted it again. And finally, I decided it's the brightness of it. It doesn't go with the rest of the old world scene. And so we're going to take a little bit of that green and a little bit of this truffle brown. Now that's a green acrylic, and I want to say it's um, Hello Hobby maybe paint. Anyway, I wanted a more muted green, still Christmassy, so I wanted that color, but not quite as bright. So we toned it down with a little bit of truffle. And at this point, I'm not sure whether I'm going to use the front or the back, and so I painted both. Now, if you know which side you're going to use, you don't have to paint both because the other side's going to be on the inside and you're not going to see it. All right, so now our little piece, supporting piece, we're going to go ahead and get that glued in, and I'm going to glue that into the inside. So I'm just going to, line it in there through the window and pull that up onto the back side of that frame and then let that dry. And now we're going to trim it out. We're going to do a little bit of trim on the roof line. And so I'm cutting everything out with my miter shears. Love these. If you don't have a pair, you need some, especially if you're going to do, tiny little wood projects. They're so handy. They also cut tumbling tower blocks pretty well too. Anyway, so we're going to go ahead and get this marked and cut and get that glued down. And then we are going to do a similar thing as we did for the door support on the inside of the window to create our window lines, if you will. Now, on this top window, it wasn't as necessary to get this perfect because we're going to kind of have that covered up a little bit with a wreath that we're going to make. There's our door. And I did go in and I think add a little doorknob with some puff paint. Or, yeah, I think it was puff paint. You could just draw that on or paint that on a little doorknob. And then we're going to trim out our window with some of that coffee stir stick and make it look all finished out. One thing I forgot to do, which I probably will go back and fix, is I did not paint inside the windowsills on these windows. And I thought it would be kind of cool to add a little scene since this is a bakery, maybe a little bakery picture inside that bottom window. I was trying to think of how to create, like a little shelf or something in there. And I suppose if I took the bottom off, which I could have done, then I could have created a whole little bakery scene inside, at least inside the window, so that, when it says bakery, it looks like bakery. And if you want to make, more than one house, if you're going to make like a little village of them, then, you could go back in and, maybe make a shop or, cocoa house or a tree farm office or make a little post office. I mean, there's all kinds of things that you could build in there. And then we're going to do the same thing for that bottom window and get it trimmed out. And now I am going to get my handy dandy pink drill again. And we are going to drill a hole in the bottom so that we can put our little tiny light inside. Now, I love these little lights. Um, you can buy them on Amazon. I will have them linked below. But I'm going to go ahead and drill a hole that's big enough that I can set this over top of that light, because if you only drill the hole big enough for the light to be in there, then you can't get it turned off. Again, if you're building this house out of chipboard instead of using this wooden one, then just don't put a bottom on it, and that'll solve a lot of your problems. All right, now we're going to make our little bakery sign. So I took a little craft stick that was a little bit bigger and cut it down to size to fit over top of our door and bottom window. And then I did sand rounded edges on the sign, just to make it look kind of more finished and professional. And then I'm going to paint it ivory, and then we're going to write onto it. And I just used paint markers to write on bakery. And if you don't want to hand write, you can always pull out a tiny little stencil, or maybe your Cricut or your cutting tool, and make bakery to go on top of it. But I don't mind my handwriting for the most part, so I'm just going to go ahead and handwrite on there. Now, the brown I used wasn't the brown I really wanted to use. I wanted it to be a little bit darker brown. I did try painting bakery on there. That didn't work out so well, so I just went over it multiple times until it was as dark as I wanted. Added on a little bit of brown around the edge with my handy dandy stamp pad. And now we're going to make a couple of wreaths. So I found some of that greenery that you can buy at Dollar Tree during the Christmas season. I think they sell something similar at Hobby Lobby. And I just trimmed that down, and then glued it together as if it were a wreath, and using that same greenery piece. And I want to say this came from Walmart last year. I just love that it's tiny little berries and tiny little pieces that are really easy to cut apart when you're wanting to make miniatures. But we're going to cut it apart and then glue it onto this wreath until we have it as full and as pretty as we want it. And then we're going to glue it over top of that top window. Then I'm going to come in with another piece of that pipe cleaner, and I'm going to paint it green again, and then we're just going to add on some berries and put that onto the front door. So after I went to all that trouble, I mean, I literally probably spent, and this is embarrassing, probably more than an hour messing with that door. So you don't have to do all that. Anyway, we're going to come in with our tiny little pipe cleaner there, and we're going to paint it this forest green color, and then drop on those berries. I love this. I did add, I might have missed that. I did add a little bit of that greenery onto the top, just to kind of, as a swag, to kind of finish out the look. But I am obsessed with how this turned out. I am loving it. Now, you could also go in, instead of using these bottle brush trees, you could go in and make some of your own little trees using different media, maybe cardstock, or some wooden pieces, and create your own bottle tree type look. But here is our grand finale with all the pieces put together on top of our little cobblestone street. And had I thought about it when I was doing this at 3 o'clock this morning, I would have only put on part of that cobblestone, and around the house and the trees, I would have left that and maybe put down some sheet moss. That might have been, a good way to do that. And then it actually does look like a street. Now, let me know in the comments below which piece was your favorite, if this is something that you would want to build. And if you do build it, please email me pictures to happytuesdaydiy@gmail.com. You know how I love to see y'all's creations.
I sure enjoyed our time together today. I hope you did too. Now, since you stuck around till the very end, here's your hint for one of next week's projects. We're gonna need some of these big dowels that you can get in the 2-pack at Dollar Tree. But until then, make it a great day and Happy Tuesday!